Hi, everyone. It's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook. And I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. I'm so pleased to have my guest today. I'll be having a conversation with Dr. Pavna K. Sodhi, who is an author, speaker, adjunct professor, and registered psychotherapist. Dr. Sodhi, who goes by she, her, has more than 25 years of psychotherapeutic and research experience, offering a unique research perspective regarding culturally responsive, trauma-informed work, BIPOC communities, and immigrant mental health. And for those who aren't familiar, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Pavna is a productive ally taking pride in decentring systemic racism, breaking barriers, and encouraging others to be culturally responsive. I first met Pavna at her presentation about deconstructing racism in mental health and immigration. And I appreciated it so much, I ran out and bought her book, Trauma-Informed Psychotherapy for BIPOC Communities, Decolonizing Mental Health. It is a wonderful book. Thank you for joining me. Welcome, Pavna. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you for that lovely and warm introduction. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you attending the workshop, and also for, just really endorsing my book. It was
It's a great book. I'm learning lots, and we're both located in Canada. I'm in British Columbia, and you're in Ontario, and that's where you work and have your practice and do your professorial things.
Exactly.
Yes. And is that where you've been your whole life, is in Ontario?
So I was born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I take pride in my maritime identity. It's a huge part of my intersectionality, actually. And so I was born and raised there. And then at the age of 23, I moved out to Ontario. So it's been 30 years since I've been in Ontario. And there was such a contrast between the two provinces, but also between the Punjabi-Sikh communities. So that's really where my interest and my research emerged, was through that curiosity.
Oh, excellent. And you're the first person that I have been able to interview about that religion, that culture, that way of life. Would you please talk with us a little bit about your experiences and give us any terms and definitions that we should know about Sikhi tradition? I'm trying to, I know you let me know before, because I needed some advice on it. Sikhism is a colonial term, and so it's not the preferred term. So yes, please teach us, let us know. What do we need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with my lived experiences around, being brought up in two cultures. So, I mean, it's very, very polar opposites, being raised in Nova Scotia versus having parents of Punjabi-Sikh ancestry. And so I am second generation. I'm very proud of that part of my identity as well. And all I can say is that it was very much a bicultural upbringing. I was very fortunate to be brought up in a home where both cultures were appreciated and modeled. And that's kind of what makes my experiences a bit unique, because it's not always the case. And I witnessed that with my friends and within the community. And then when I came up here and I was doing research as well, a lot of the participants noted that too, that they came from a very collectivist kind of upbringing. So that means that there was a lot of family togetherness, which was fine, but then there could have been family enmeshment. There could have been putting the family's needs before their own, so the familial piety. There's conformity, there's group decision making, and really not that much encouragement around autonomy and developing any kind of independence. So that was really not my upbringing. We definitely had the family togetherness. My parents were both involved in my cultural upbringing. They were so good about preserving culture and religion in our home. But when it came to language, that's where we had a bit of a concern. And I think that was a result of their upbringing in India during, the British rule and the colonization, where English was considered more of a privileged language than speaking Punjabi or Hindi. So we didn't learn Punjabi fluently at home, even though they spoke it. We listened to music, and we went to our Sikh temple, which is called the Gurdwara, which means House of God. So what we did, the three of us, so I have an older sister and a younger brother, is that we learned it on our own. So we would go back and forth to India. That was another gift my parents gave us. So we went back and forth to India all our lives, and we would learn it from our grandparents. And then in between those trips, we would continue to, practice. And I learned how to speak Punjabi, write Punjabi, read Punjabi. I'm still doing it. I mean, sometimes language gets lost a bit when we're surrounded by other responsibilities and priorities. So that was that piece. And then also in terms of cultural preservation, this is a really important detail, Janice, is that sometimes when we're living in a bicultural kind of existence, we can be maybe Punjabi on the weekends, where we connect with our ethnic peers, our community. We go to the Gurdwara, like I said, the House of God. And that was lovely. But then during the weekdays, we are Canadian, right? So we're in school with, individualist kind of ideologies and mindsets, to then our extracurricular activities. So I was involved in like Girl Guides and all of these community things. So I look at that, and that was kind of sometimes hard to navigate those two worlds. The back and forth was a little challenging. And then I would be influenced a bit. So then there would be a bit of that challenging at home around wanting to do things that my quote unquote Canadian peers were allowed to do.
Yeah, I think that must be very challenging for a lot of young people growing up in a similar circumstance to what you're describing. And there are cultural and things that are important at home, and you're also happy to be part of that community. And then the other part of reality is you're going to school every day with people who are not part of that community. And there's real tension there.
Well, there's tension, and then there could be some internalized racism, right? And this need to fit in, and this need to have close proximity to whiteness. So, I look at even the simplest things, like my parents changing their names, right? So they went from my mom's name, Sathpal, and she started calling herself Polly because people could not say her name. My father's name is Surinder, and he went to Sid, and because they just could not say their names properly. And my name, so they gave us all very Punjabi-Sikh names, like my sister's name, my brother's name. Actually, I think with my sister, they liked Natasha, so they stuck with something that was, very true to their heart. But with myself, I was called Pavna until I was 18 years old. And I didn't correct anybody. And then by the time I was 18, I was getting tired of it. I was getting tired. And I said, you know what? I'm starting university. I want to be called Pavna. That's my name.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so there was a bit of that internalized racism, I think, around name, around language, a lot of little things that happened. I don't think it was intentional on my parents' part, but it was really just their need to fit in. So that happened a lot in our community, especially in Nova Scotia, where our community was small. I don't know if it's the same in Ontario or even out in BC where there's a large Punjabi-Sikh community. I think there's different kinds of cultural preservation that's happening. But I noticed that so much in our community. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. All those things that you're saying, and they're things that many of us just wouldn't even consider. Those of us who are just kind of born and raised in very typical Canadian culture, and not really stopping to consider what it's like for other people growing up in this society. That is also why I'm so glad you're here today. And I did wonder about. And it's so if you feel ready to go here, we can go here. But
Absolutely.
I'm wondering about Sikh teachings and how they influence daily life and cultural expressions in Punjabi-Sikh community. And also I'm thinking of, because you were in a regular kind of westernized school, but then you're going home and being in your own, in the home culture. So what was it like? How was your day-to-day life impacted, or how is it impacted?
So, I mean, I think it's ongoing. It's lifelong. It's just like a bicultural identity. So it's very much that, and it's modeled. So a lot of the Sikh teachings need to be modeled. But I think what I'd like to do, if we have a moment, is just talk a little about Sikhi and what Sikhi consists of, because I think that is not talked a lot about. Like, we just don't talk about what it is. There's a lot of generalizations, a lot of stereotypes, a lot of prejudices, but what does it consist of? Because it's a beautiful, beautiful religion. So the Sikh religion is the youngest, one of the youngest in the world. And it was founded over 500 years ago by the first guru, Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And that was in 1469 Common Era. So you can imagine it's not very old. And it was founded in India, in the northern state of Punjab. And then he was the first of 10 gurus. And then we had 9 other gurus who contributed to various Sikh teachings, beliefs, practices, which are embedded in the final, what we call the final, maybe the 11th guru, as we call it sometimes, the Guru Granth Sahib. And within that, we have all of these teachings, right? So the first thing that comes from the teachings is there's one God, Ek Onkar. And that is, in and of itself, such a beautiful sentiment that we are all equal and we're praying to one God. And I don't think a lot of people acknowledge that. They don't know that this is really kind of the premise of Sikhi. The word Sikh in Punjabi means learner. So Sikhi means to learn. So we're constantly learning. We're constantly educating. We're constantly teaching. And we're spreading the word in a very, very experiential way to others. So there's no such thing as conversion. We don't convert. People may want to convert to Sikhi, but we don't encourage the whole notion of conversion. So there's a lot of really, like, it's lovely when you think about it in that context. When we think about Punjabi-Sikh culture, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's worth mentioning again, that it's not just, the religion. It's also, again, it's the culture and the language. So the three are very much intertwined. So when you go to a Punjabi school, you would learn about all three. And it's representative of what happens in the northern state of Punjab. Right? So sometimes we look at different things. We can have Punjabi Hindus, Punjabi Muslims, and they can be from, different religious backgrounds, or they might speak different languages. But when we talk about people who are Punjabi-Sikh, it is language, religion, and culture. So that was my upbringing, with some Hindi thrown in because of the dialect that we speak at home. There are holidays that are noteworthy to mention. We have 3 main holidays. And starting in April, which is April 13th and 14th, we celebrated last month what's called Vaisakhi, which is the Sikh harvest time. And also the birth of Khalsa, which was created by our 10th guru, Guru Gobind Singh. And then in the fall, we have Bandi Chor Divas, which overlaps with Diwali. and Diwali is celebrated throughout India and other parts of the world. But it is basically a welcoming of Guru Hargobind and the prisoners that were exiled. So we would light up diyas or lanterns to welcome all these prisoners back. So it's all really like beautiful, beautiful meaning around welcoming and being warm to others. And then we have Gurpurab, which is 2 weeks later. And that's the birth of our founder of our religion, Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And it's his birth anniversary. So that really kind of just gives you a little bit of a summary around Sikhi. And from there, it just gets better, Janice.
Oh,
it really
does. Okay.
Because I want to say that this was very much represented in my upbringing, whether I observed my grandparents or my aunts and uncles, my cousins in India, to my parents, who were so consistent around modeling these 3 key pillars of Sikhi. So the first one is Nam Japo, which means focus on God, right? And to engage in meditation and prayer. So that was very consistent. I grew up reciting the Mool Mantra, which is the first passage of the Japji Sahib, which is part of the Guru Granth Sahib. I know it's very complicated, but every night. So I had, evening prayers until a certain age. And then then we graduated towards doing other types of prayers, whether it's singing religious hymns called shabads, or even going to the Gurdwara and reading from the scriptures. There was a variety of options to really embody religion in a very positive way, and all very experiential.
Okay, and so that I just have a little question about that, the experiential part. So in the Christian tradition that I was raised in, the idea was that God and one's relationship with God is very personal. So I would pray to God with the expectation that God was listening, God cared, God was watching. Is that similar in your tradition, or is it different?
I think there is. I think it is definitely in the form of a connection to protect. So I think there are parallels for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was that. And I think, to this day, it's interesting you say that, because to this day, I would pray before even going on a plane, or this is when I was younger, going back and forth between Halifax and Ontario. But also for my children too, if something was happening, I would pray. I remember even before defending my doctoral dissertation, it was the same thing. I would pray, I would pull out my scriptures, and I can read Gurmukhi, so I was reading it quietly. And that's how it was modeled. It was never thrown in our face. It was never shoved down our throat. It wasn't like, you have to do this. You have to, exemplify what a Sikhi does. It was just done in such a great way. So I really marvel my parents for that. I want to just share the other 2 pillars, if that's okay. Kirit Karo, which means sustain an honest living. So really important. The second word in our scriptures is Satnam, which means truth is his name, or truth is their name, right? So being honest, being truthful is so important. And having that honest living and really demonstrating that to future generations is important as well. And then the last pillar, which is my favorite and overlaps material with my last book, of course, I talk so much about community care and the importance of having that, is Band Chakko, which means to share with others, to cultivate a sense of community. And that is so, so important. I think, not only in Punjabi-Sikh culture, but also I think overall, when we're looking at what can we do in terms of sharing resources and knowledge and working with others. So it's exactly what we're doing here today, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And to have those pillars was really important, whether they were named or not growing up. I'm sure they were, but, I repeatedly saw that. At least with my parents. So grateful for that.
Yeah. It sounds beautiful. I love especially the importance put on the community aspect, because I feel like that's something that's missing for a lot of people, and particularly today when we're in times that seem divided. The idea of returning to community and contributing to community is so important.
Supporting community, any kind of support, right? And so how do you do that? And how do you do that? Through nourishment and basic needs? Or is it through emotional connections? Is it through, I think about our community in Halifax, and there was a lot of, it wasn't easy back then to go back and forth to India for some of our friends, and to have that kind of sense of family, right? How do you even achieve that? And so our community really became our family, at least our family in Canada. And then, like I said earlier, we were fortunate to go back and forth to have those connections with my extended family in India. Yeah.
That's very precious.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, I'm so happy for you that you had a loving environment where the teachings were not forced on you. It just felt like part of the normal life in your home.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's very much.
Not everybody has that.
No,
yeah.
And I think that's where we're gonna be talking about that, because even though that was my upbringing, and I always try to share, positive examples of anything, whether it's around the Punjabi culture or the Sikh religion. It wasn't always the case. So we witnessed a lot in our community around those who were challenged by some of these, whether it was through internalized racism or intergenerational trauma or whatever it was, for them to really kind of want to separate or extricate themselves from the Punjabi-Sikh way of being, right?
Right. And there was the intergenerational trauma for sure. And I'm sure you'll touch on that. That was very interesting and sad to learn about. Yeah.
Yeah, there is so much history. I mean, it dates back. I'm not sure if you'd like to talk about it now, or if you'd like to move on to other.
Whichever way you want to go is good with me.
Yeah, I think we did talk about the family and such. So I think we can move on to it. And we talked about the community and the Sikh community being very important too. So when we look at things such as, the history of Punjabi Sikhs, whether they're in India or whether they're in Canada, the Canadian diaspora, it is so multi-layered, Janice. It's like tremendous. And it dates back to the Mughal times. So, Sikh history goes back way back, even like 500, 600, 700 years ago, with the differences between the Mughal community and the Sikh community. And so that is really the first part of it. But then when we come and look at it, maybe through the last 200 years, when we see what has happened over the last 200 years, there's been so much in terms of colonization, exploitation, the rule from the British, right? The British Raj being in India, starting in the mid 1800s, to being there and really wanting to change and convert everyone's way of being, right? And there was certainly some white supremacy and some obviously colonization and, just that spread of individualism that they were hoping to achieve. They just thought that their way was better, and it has caused significant damage still to this day. It's only 200 years ago. And so when we look at that, they encountered, economic corruption, oppression, poverty, famine, and they developed a cultural inferiority complex and even a scarcity mindset. So that's the start of it. And that's during my grandparents' time.
Wow.
So both of my grandparents were born in the early 1900s, and they were a part of the British rule, the British Raj. And then we move on to the next piece of history that was also monumental. I mean, there's other things that have happened, but I'm just going to focus on the main ones, if that's okay. It's a partition of India and Pakistan. And that dividing old India into India and Pakistan, that being Western and Eastern Pakistan, which then became Eastern Pakistan, became Bangladesh, 1971. Having that happen, was traumatic for everyone because there was so much displacement and migration from old India to new India. And I heard these stories because my parents were young at the time. And at first they did not want to talk about it. And they said, we don't want to talk about it.
Because it was so painful.
So painful. They had somatic responses to it. They were just taken back. I think they were re-traumatized. And I was curious because I was reading books on, this was right at the start of my career. So I was reading, books on the partition. I was reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, all at the same time. I don't know why. I don't know what I was doing to my nervous system, but I really wanted to learn. And let me tell you, I didn't pick up a book for the 4 months after I read those books. I couldn't.
Right.
I was so activated. I just needed to just regulate my nervous system. Anyways, that being said, I had a lot of questions. I'm like, they both lived through it. I knew like vague details around my mother, taking a train from what is now Pakistan to India, and my grandfather orchestrating this whole trip. But she did not want to talk about it. So finally, when I wrote this book, I said, I really need to know details. Like, I need to know them. It's important. Even though you're normalizing it and saying it was just meant to be and it was part of the history and not naming the trauma and maybe engaging in spiritual bypassing, I need to know. And so she tells me this narrative, and it was horrific. So that has stayed with me because it was not only my mother and her 6 sisters that were transported from Pakistan to India, it was my grandparents and how hypervigilant they became during that time, and the hypervigilance that I've noted in my book around my grandmother, who, just needed to lock doors and was always kind of worried and very anxious. And so that just continued. And was somewhat passed down to myself as well a bit. And I'm working on that. I'm working on breaking that cycle a bit. So that was that event, and that was horrible. And it not only affected my family, but it affected obviously a lot of families in Canada, in India, and created a lot of violence and genocide and refugee camps. And of course, lifelong hatred between Pakistanis and Indians, which we are now seeing again.
Yes.
Which is also,
Horrible.
Affecting everyone's nervous system again, right? So all the conversations that we're having. So these are like 2 main events. And then the third event, Janice, is the anti-Sikh massacre, which just punctuated it all. And I grew up during that time. So I went to India before the massacres, and then I went to India after the massacre. So I saw what the Golden Temple looked like before the invasion, what they called Operation Blue Star, to what happened afterwards, where there was bullet holes in holy scriptures. There was just buildings that were, knocked down. There were tanks that went all over the Golden Temple, which is the holiest temple for Sikhs. So cracks in the marble, and it was really horrible. And from that, there was a retaliation, which led to the riots. So Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her 2 Sikh bodyguards on October 31st, 1984, and that led to tens and 20,000 of people dying in these riots.
Oh my gosh. Wow. And when I think of, I just think of a peaceful religion when I'm thinking of your religion. And so for people to have been that activated and riled up, I mean, it is horrifying. There was so much loss there.
There was, and I think, you brought up an important point here. So definitely it being peaceful, but I think the first half of the religion was peaceful, like in terms of what Guru Nanak, our founder, created with Ik Onkar, there's one God. to then the 10th Guru, the founder of Khalsa, Guru Gobind Singh, which we almost had to evolve into quote unquote warriors. So there's a bit of that instinctual kind of, well, we're not going to tolerate this. That is more around protecting ourselves, not about causing harm to others, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there was a bit of that evolution. I mean, that's my interpretation of what I learned growing up. There was so much, even during the Mughal times, around gurus being killed or massacred or tortured, their children being tortured, horrible stories. So that's what happened. And then the residual effect of the 1984 riots went on for years. So even in my travels during the 90s and the 2000s, we still see it. And then, of course, there's 9/11, post 9/11, and the conflation of Muslims and Sikhs and the anti-Sikh rhetoric that was happening, and the tension, and people were just being killed, and the hate crimes, and on, which I talk about in my book. So imagine hearing all of that, right? And then what happens? Well, a lot of people engage in internalized racism. They're just like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't want to be a proud Sikh, Punjabi-Sikh individual. And how do we do that? I talk about that in my book, is that sometimes these events happen and we need to name them and process and heal and all of those things. But we also need to remember our roots and our ancestry, right? And we have to remember the really positive teachings of the religion, also what we've learned from the culture. But that's not easy for everyone, right? So we saw a lot of people, again, kind of rebel against the religion by cutting their hair. Right. So I guess this is a good place to, if you're okay, we can talk about, the importance of these 6 symbols and what happens, So really, when we talk about the internalized racism, there's 5 Ks that Sikh individuals follow, those who are baptized particularly. And the first one is Kes, which is uncut hair. And then we have Ganga, which is a wooden comb to comb their uncut hair. Gada, which is what I'm wearing, right? So I wear one of these, and I've been wearing one all my life. And it's my kind of representation and tribute to being Punjabi-Sikh. Kachera, which is an undergarment, which is almost like a long undergarment mostly for men. And then a kirpan, which is a sword. But the problem is that some of these are so visible, right? Right. And how is it possible to wear this in the Western world and not have this kind of acceptance, right? So the internalized racism is just, it's really rampant, and not being able to fit in is also rampant. So this is what happened, I think, with that piece. We saw a lot of individuals kind of altering their identity, right? And they went from being turban Sikhs to then being clean-shaven Sikhs, which then caused tension with their families.
Right. Yeah, that's such a massive visual change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my father had to go through that too, Janice. So he did that in the 1960s, and he came over with a turban and a beard. And it was like the early 1960s. So this was 1961. And educated, could speak English, all of these things. So he would go to these interviews, and they were really impressed with his credentials and his ability to communicate in English. But then his visual appearance as a psychologist, because he's a psychologist, would have been not acceptable in northern Alberta, where they immigrated.
Right.
So they basically said, we will employ you if you remove your turban. Now, removing the turban for somebody who's sick is a huge ordeal, right? Because
it just about makes me cry, even just.
It was horrible.
Yes.
So my father, who's way better at naming trauma, than my mother is.
Mm.
She's getting better, but my father definitely knows how to name trauma. He told us this narrative, and it was heart-wrenching. And I do talk about it in my first book. I do talk about it and how he described it. And he went to the barber shop with a friend, couldn't go alone. And he sat in the chair and he watched his hair be cut and fall to the floor. And he didn't even want to leave his hair. At the end, he gathered it and took it with him, and he cried. So he went in as a turbaned sick man and left as a clean-shaven sick. It's brutal.
Yes, it is. Wow. And that's the only way that he could gain the employment that he obviously needed. Yes. Yeah. Wow.
But with that came consequences. So he was engaged to my mother at the time. They weren't sure if they wanted him that if he could marry my mother, because now he was clean shaven. His family kind of questioned why he migrated to Canada and whatever else from India. So there was a lot of consequences that he had to deal with. And to this day, he has such regret. He had regret about moving to Canada, but he knew he had to for other reasons, other family issues. But then to change his identity was very difficult for him. So what he did instead, even though he was a clean-shaven man and still is to this day,
you
know, and my father's 92 years old now, so turning 92 next month, is that he really preserved Sikh religion in our home. Like I said, one would never guess how spiritual he is and how much he did, not only for us, but also for the community, right?
Oh, yes. Beautiful.
But with that, he had to let go. He had to shed a part of that.
Yes. I wonder about that with your brother, because I think, did you mention that you have a brother?
I have a brother, but, we grew up again with the internalized racism that they did not want my brother to be subjected to that. So even I was allowed to cut my hair. We were allowed to cut our hair to a certain age. And I think at age 10, then my dad was like, it'd be nice if my daughters had long hair. And so he kind of asked us for that. And then, but we just still were not in favor of it. Like, we just didn't really care.
In the 80s, it was big in the 70s, but in the 80s, we had lots of short hair.
We all wanted, different hairstyles. And now it's not such a big deal. Like, we don't go home and he's like, oh, I wish you had like this long braid and this and that.
Right.
He understands that it is something from within, but I think because he couldn't keep his long hair, he wanted us to.
Right.
He just was like, okay, somebody has to in this family. So we, like my mother, my sister, myself. My sister kept her long hair for a long time. She still actually has longish hair. But I think I didn't really think it really defined who I was. Like I said, well, I do a lot of other things, and
my
identity is not embedded in whether or not I have long hair or uncut.
Right. Your dad sounds like such a beautiful example, even though the getting there was extremely traumatizing, but a beautiful example of a man who continued to embody the principles and values of his belief system without them, say, the rigidity that some people require in order to still maintain those beliefs and values. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, he definitely was considered still considered a role model in our community. So, and we'll talk about that later on, but it goes beyond just him preserving and transmitting Punjabi-Sikh culture in our congregation and in our Maritime Sikh Society, which I definitely want to pay homage to, because that was where I spent almost every Sunday singing religious hymns and everything, and learned so much. To now really helping community members on a whole other level. So we've had some tragic things happen in Halifax, some unfortunate deaths. And my dad, with his background in psychology, has been able to help community members heal from these events. And he's also a trauma specialist. So there's a lot of that he's able to, he's able to. It's very, very versatile within the community. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I just want to honor the heaviness, the seriousness, the significance of the story that you just shared with us about what your dad went through, and unfortunately, your dad wasn't the only person
No.
to experience these things. Moving to Canada, which is obviously less accepting of these things. Wow. Okay. Hopefully we're moving forward as a country and becoming more accepting as we go along. But
I
we'll
would hope
see.
so. I mean, I
Mhm.
felt like it was way more pronounced maybe in the 1980s. And we saw it with community members. So my dad, cut his hair in the 1960s, but then, we talked about, you and I, in our conversations around those who were shunned or those who became
Yeah.
atheist. And we did have one family friend whose son during the 1980s, of course, it was like 1985 after all these riots happened in India, wanted to cut his hair. So they were one of the few Punjabi-Sikh families who had become baptized and also had their sons had kept their hair. So this was a big deal, especially in Nova Scotia. But I think he was done with it. He was in his third year of university and he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And he threatened to cut his hair, and his parents basically went into shock, and they felt like him cutting his hair was equal to him dying.
Wow.
It was so extreme. And I still remember, I was only 13 at the time, and I remember all the conversation around it and my parents going over to support. And, here my dad is clean shaven, supporting this, saying, trying to make sense of it and everything that was going on in India and the fears that this person was having because he was a turbaned individual in Nova Scotia.
Mhm.
Right. And maybe the racism he was experiencing as a result. Right.
Right. And would it ever get that serious, that cantankerous between family members where they would shun or cut off a family member who
I
didn't
think,
choose to preserve those things?
yeah, so it has happened. And I think in their family, there was distance and some alienation. And I think after a while, I think they just, there was a little bit of forgiveness, but not complete.
Mhm.
But to this day, I mean, I still like that story's embedded in my mind as how could you do that to your child who was clearly
Right.
suffering?
Yes. Yes, that's
You know,
that's true, and that is something that I see in my own practice as
right?
well, where parents or family members uh, who are very deeply entrenched in their belief system, and it's working for them. They're happy to be
Yeah,
there, but they will sometimes, unfortunately, choose the religion over the relationship with
absolutely.
their loved one who is walking a different path, and
Mhm.
that's just painful all around.
Mhm. Yeah, I think in that case, the religion was definitely forced onto these
Right.
individuals, and they were forced to become baptized. It's not like
Mhm.
it's optional in our religion. You don't have to be baptized to be a devotee of Sikhi,
Mhm.
right? You can
Mhm.
still. My grandparents weren't baptized, and I witnessed a lot of their pilgrimages to different Sikh gurdwaras you know in India. It wasn't like a mandatory piece, but I think that it was just like this is like the ultimate is to become baptized. But with that, you would
Oh,
have to, like I said, you would have to um, make sure you represented all the five Ks, right? The uncut
right.
hair and the comb and it just
Mhm.
was, yeah,
And when I think of people being in Canada, that some of those things uh, would be um, would be challenging. I mean, just even thinking of if the undergarments are longer. But I mean, I guess same in India. It's a very hot place. So in Canada, or even I remember when we had our first Sikh RCMP member, and
absolutely.
he was there was this big to do about would he have to cut his hair to wear the RCMP hat instead of a turban, and actually in my Christian home that I was living in at the time, my mom was so upset that
Mhm.
anyone would ever try and insist that a religious Sikh person would have to cut their hair. She found that deeply offensive, and we talked
Yeah.
about that a lot.
Yeah, it's good to have these conversations. It has to start somewhere, right? That's how we spread
Yeah.
awareness, right?
Yeah,
Part of
I
it.
agree. Yeah. We
Yeah.
still have about 10 minutes
Mm.
left, and this will just be the first of hopefully many conversations that you and I get to have, because these
Absolutely.
topics are so important and so interesting, and I want people to be thinking in such a broader cultural
Hmm.
sense than what they were raised in, and see what does it mean to be uh, a member of the human society, to be a
Absolutely.
good person in healthy relationship with other people who don't necessarily believe the way that we do. So, yes, what else would you like to tell us in the time that we have left today?
I think I'd like to just add to the piece around awareness, right? And I think one of our questions that we had were around debunking myths about the Sikh community.
Yes.
Okay? And I think there has been several myths, stereotypes, prejudices to really portray Punjabi Sikhs in a negative light. And as you can see, there's different extremes. We've talked about it. We've talked about the peaceful element. We've talked about the warrior element. We've talked about what it looks like if you don't, if you cut your hair, right? And how that's internalized. But when I look at this just in terms of the whole notion around Sikh phobia, and even when we look at Islamophobia too, all of it, and how these are all conflated and really worsening in Canada right now. What can
Mm,
we do? Right. And so I talk about this in my book around productive allyship. And I think exactly what we're doing here. This is not performative. This is a productive endeavor to have these
yes.
conversations, to not just talk about it, and just say, okay, you know what, Janice, let's maybe have a podcast on this topic. We're actually doing it. We're putting words into action. And we're seeing that. We're amplifying these marginalized voices, right? And we need to have that happen. But it's not just necessarily in this space. How can we have these conversations at home, like you did with your mother? How can we have them at school? How can we educate, through presentations, through having individuals from, Punjabi Sikh backgrounds talk about their culture and their heritage and their religion with classmates, going to events, anything that's going to just really heighten our awareness around these communities, to then seeing what we can do within the community. So even within a community, South Asian community, we can see that interminority kind of conflict. What can we do even with that? Right?
Mhm.
At one point, we just all used to stick together, and now we don't because of what happened with the British rule. And
Right.
that's been in research for years now, how detrimental it's been to our South Asian continent. To then seeing what we can do within society and the host culture, right? So exactly what we're doing, but I think that's so important to not only talk about all the wonderful things that Sikhi has to offer, but there are things that are being almost taken to another level that are affecting future generations.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like what? Can you get specific about that?
I think there's a bit of this, and I see it because I have two daughters who went to Punjabi school. One went to a traditional Punjabi school where she learned language, culture, and religion. And it was lovely. And to this day, she's 21 years old, and she has an appreciation, a deeper appreciation for Sikhi and also Punjabi culture. I have another daughter who's 12 years old and did not have those experiences. We just did not put her in the traditional Punjabi school because at this point, the school board, the Catholic school board, believe it or not, was offering Punjabi. I know what a contrast. But so she's attending Punjabi school, being taught by first generation Punjabi immigrants, right? And what I've witnessed there is that there are some students there that obviously want to assimilate or who want to become independent or whatever, but they are really confined by the culture and religion. Meanwhile, as you probably are already aware, the culture is evolving in India. And in some ways, they might even be more progressive than we are.
Mm-hmm.
So even when I was growing up and going back to India, and I was sitting with my grandmother, and I would go to like the Gurdwara with my grandmother. We would go like every so often for the 6:30 in the morning service. So the morning service, my cousins would be like, we don't even do this. You know, wearing the clothes, singing religious hymns, and then do it. But I think what it is that I was interested in it, first of all. I was interested, I was invested. My grandmother appreciated it. There wasn't any like people pleasing here. It was like genuine, I want to do this for you.
Right.
I want to do it. I want to spend time with you. I want to have these memories of sitting next to you and listening to these religious hymns.
Mm.
You know, how often do I get to do this? As I was living in Canada, we don't know the next trip if they're going to be even alive, right? So just made the most of it. But I see here in Canada, it's almost very much forced. And I think there isn't that awareness around developing a bicultural identity.
Mm-hmm.
And picking and choosing what is going to fit into one's mindset, what is going to resonate with them, what is it that they're going to pass on to their future generations, right? Or to their So that's kind of what I'm witnessing a bit of.
Right. And so it sounds like the tension remains as far as having a culture and a religion also that's the part of the identity, and being in a place where that's not the dominant aspect or belief system in the society. And so how do you honor those things that are part of your culture and belief system while still being able to kind of move smoothly and navigate society at large? It's just it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it isn't. And this is where the rebelling starts. So you don't have those conversations at home if you don't make language, religion, culture fun at home. It's and I don't want to say optional, but maybe a little bit kind of like, let's expose you to this, but it's not necessary to make it a part of your way of being, right? That's where it becomes an issue. And like I said, I saw that growing up with some of my peers who just resented the fact that they had to go to the Gurdwara every week and listen to these religious hymns. Or they had to speak Punjabi at home, or they had to do whatever. That was not my case. And in fact, I feel like I've preserved more as a result, really. I just have.
Yeah.
Really, and I say that I'm very, very proud of my cultural and religious background to this day. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful and refreshing, and our conversation is so different than probably most of the conversations really that I've had on this podcast. And I'm so grateful you're willing to sit with us and explain some of these things, give us definitions, and also experientially what it's been like for you. And of course, the wisdom and experience that you bring also as a psychotherapist and a researcher. It's just been wonderful, so interesting. And I really hope you'll join me again, because I know there's a lot more for us to talk about.
Part two.
Yes. Oh, I want to hold up your book. This is your latest book.
Yeah.
And it's Trauma-Informed Psychotherapy for BIPOC Communities, Decolonizing Mental Health by Pavna K. Sodhi, EdD. And then you also mentioned an earlier book. What's the name of that book?
Yeah. So I have a couple of books. I just kind of want to, because this one. This was in 2017, Exploring Immigrant and Sexual Minority Mental Health. So I talk a lot about identity formation. And I talk about first and second generation narratives, and it pulls from my previous research, my doctoral research around ethnic identity formation, biculturalism. I talk about sexual identity formation, as well as the combination of ethnic and sexual minority development. So this was, oh my goodness, 8 years ago. And then the other book I would like to just give a shout out to, because this is something that has been so wonderful, is my father's book that he co-authored. Both my parents actually have authored books on Sikhism. My mom has written books on prayers and talking about the Sikhi way of being. And so far it's been very well received. But this one is my dad's recent publication in the last couple of years called Concepts in Sikhism, and has all the definitions. It's a great resource for anybody who wants to learn about some of these topics that we've discussed today. And it's just almost like a dictionary.
Yeah. Wow. And your dad's in his 90s and he's still
dad's still writing. Last week he was writing about Guru Nanak Dev Ji. I mean, my dad just loves this has also been very much modeled. My parents are authors, and this kind of been passed down a bit as a way to ground and to way to express. So journaling and all of that has been a part of my way of being. Yeah.
I feel like Canada is richer for having you and your family here. So thank you again. And how can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn if they'd like to. So I'm there as Pavna K. Sodhi. And I'm also
your website?
On my website, that's right. Sorry, most important. www.pavnaksodhi.com. And I also have an Instagram handle, Sonotherapy, SUNOTHERAPY. So yeah. Wonderful. So that's where I am. I welcome any questions or any kind of feedback or anything. It's been so lovely speaking with you, Janice. Thanks so much for providing this space.
My pleasure.
Just really this opportunity to talk about Punjabi-Sikh, and Sikhi in general, I guess.
Wow. To be continued.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So. Yeah.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and I'll be sure to have Dr. Pavna Sodhi back with us again. So take care, everyone.